Story 1. I had an incredible urge to go to my employee's house. It was overwhelming. I called my mom, thinking I was losing my mind, and she advised me to trust my instincts, so I went. Felt strange. Who wants their boss showing up after hours? When I arrived at his house, I heard a faint "help me" coming from inside. I kicked the door in, went inside, and found that he had a stroke 24 to 48 hours prior to my arrival. He was lying on the floor and would have rotted there if I had dismissed that strange urge. Story 2. I received a postcard in the mail in 2018. It was sent by my parents when they visited China in 1997. I was astonished and thought I was being pranked, as it took a very long time to be delivered. Story 3. My son and I were riding the train in Chicago. He said, "Dad, don't you have a friend from Chicago? Maybe we will see him." I seriously doubt it, son. Chicago is huge. He got off at the next stop. Story 4. Elephants were wandering just outside my Midwest town. I figured they must have escaped from a train car to roam around, but seeing for fully grown elephants was surreal. Story 5. Hotel cleaning staff returned to the front desk, complaining that they couldn't clean a room due to an alligator in the bathtub. I thought I was misunderstanding something at first. I wasn't. There was indeed a decent-sized alligator in the bathtub, about 3 feet long, which in my mind wasn't big enough to be lethal, but definitely large enough that I didn't want anyone going back in there. It turned out he was the animal handler for a magic show. The even bigger surprise was that when he came home from the set that day and asked why his room hadn't been cleaned, he claimed to our faces that there were no animals in his room now or ever. I held the line through an increasingly baffling and angry conversation, so certain that I even started to doubt reality itself. This continued throughout his weeks-long stay. Housekeeping resorted to taking pictures of whatever strange exotic animal he had in there, and he still denied it. At one point, he started saying his assistant had been in the room all day, so it was perfectly safe, yet no one would be there. He would become practically furious, which was typical, but the bizarre part was his repeated insistence that it was perfectly safe, that there were no animals, and then there would be a capuchin monkey loose in the room. Story 6. It was freezing outside. I had just gotten off work and was $1 short for the bus fare to get home. It was too cold and icy to walk home safely. My wealthy father wouldn't send me the $1 I needed. For no reason, he just didn't want to. I went to the library to warm up and figure out what to do. I grabbed a random library book, opened it to a random page, and found a folded dollar bill inside. Not as unusual as some of the other stories, but I was very grateful. Story 7. I once hugged a stranger on the street because we started crying at the same time for totally different reasons. Then we laughed like children for 10 minutes straight. Story 8. I was born in Lebanon during the war in the 1980s. I had a best friend whom I lost track of because we were always running from bomb shelter to bomb shelter and from city to city. I migrated to Canada in 1989, and when I reached college, I met that friend again. We were at the same college in the same city in Canada. I didn't recognize him, but he recognized me because my face never really changed. It was the perfect example of how small the world is. Story 9. I wasn't even looking up when I was in the passenger seat of a head-on collision. All I know is a loud bang happened, and when I looked up, it was a red metal wall on fire. I looked to my right, and there was an open street with debris all over the road. Still, none of this made sense. I had no idea where I was or why blood was pouring from my face into my hands. I was trying to figure out what the burning red wall was. Then I looked to my right again, and a young blonde woman was screaming into a phone. I was still trying to understand why there was a red wall. Then I saw a firefighter, and he jostled me around a lot and asked a bunch of questions, something about my age. I was loaded onto a gurney, and as I was wheeled away, I saw the whole smashed car. Suddenly, I realized I was in an accident, and the red wall was the hood of the car, smashed up vertically with the battery on fire. None of it made sense until I saw the whole car. Story 10. I received a phone call offering me a job, for which I didn't even remember applying, just when I was about to give up my search. First, I thought it was a prank. Story 11. I received a message from a stranger saying, "You saved my life. It turns out I had responded kindly to their random forum post a year earlier. Story 12. One spring afternoon in 2013, tornado struck Oklahoma in the morning. Being in southwestern Missouri, I was looking at the sky for any interesting clouds, and I believe we were under a tornado watch. The local news reported one tornado in Oklahoma that destroyed the attics of several homes and lofted debris high into the atmosphere, with some pieces of roofing felt and paper landing here in Springfield, Missouri. As I walked down our street, about 5 houses away from home, I saw something tumbling down from the increasingly tumultuous sky. It landed a few yards away, and I leaned over into the yard to grab it. It was a piece of paper about 1 inch by 1 inch, a neatly cut fragment from some kind of school textbook. The cut had gone through a paragraph, so I had only portions of sentences, but the words were, "and causes hot air to rise. The formation of tornadoes." I honestly thought I was losing my mind. I kept it with me for many years until it disintegrated. It sounds just as ridiculous every time I retell the story. Story 13. I had a lucid dream at 16 years old where I could fly by flapping my arms. I flew around my neighborhood in the mountains and noticed a house with a blue roof at the corner of Pine Ridge and Hook Creek Road back in the late 1970s. The dream felt so real. I even went looking for the house, found it, but it didn't have a blue roof. My teleportation fantasy was crushed. Just a dream, but it felt so real. 5 years later, I was a crew member on a Forest Service helitack crew. We were dispatched to a lightning strike in my neighborhood. I was hanging out of the door of the helicopter looking for smoke when I suddenly had a déjà vu experience. I recognized the flight pattern from my dream. I was shocked because I could predict the helicopter's flight. I accurately predicted the next couple of turns. I gasped as I looked down because the house had a blue roof. I just got big goosebumps remembering. The weirdest experience ever. Story 14. I went to my girlfriend's family's place for Thanksgiving. About 30 to 40 people were there. As the food was finally ready, everyone gathered around and brought out a flag, and they all started singing the Pledge of Allegiance. I honestly thought, this is very strange. Turns out they were pranking me, and they got me good. Story 15. I texted my mom to ask if she wanted me to pick up food for us on my way home from work. I had been rude to her in the morning before I left and felt bad. My dad replied 30 minutes later, saying, "Mom's gone. She passed. The ambulance is here. She died unexpectedly at 9 in the morning, just after I had been huffing at her to get out of the bathroom so I could shower and go to work. An hour before my shift ended, I remember walking in a daze and running straight into my boss, just choking. I don't remember driving home or what was said when I got there. She was inside under a cloth, and all I could see were her feet sticking up. I kept thinking this was a joke or a bad dream. She was only 54, and I was 23. I hadn't expected to lose a parent at all, much less on a random Tuesday in October. It still feels surreal, her death, planning her funeral, driving up to Toronto to pick up a casket, the entire year after her passing. The scariest part is that I don't remember what she sounded like or what she looked like anymore. She hated having her picture taken, and I think my way of coping with this sudden trauma was to forget what it was like living with her. My entire childhood, teenage years, and early adulthood just feel like I'm watching a movie about someone else when she was alive. Grief is strange, and explaining that this world is ending for me, but everyone else is going to work and paying bills, feeling is difficult. Story 16. Delivering pizzas in my 20s, I knocked on a door, only to realize after I knocked that I was at the wrong address. Let's call it 9th Street Southwest instead of 9th Street Northwest. I was exactly on the other side of town from where I needed to be. As the man opened the door, I was about to say, "Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to disturb you. Have a nice day," which is my usual response at a wrong address. But the man didn't look confused and was holding money ready to go. Turns out he ordered pizza and accidentally put his address in wrong. This means I was accidentally at the right place. Our two mistakes perfectly canceled each other out. To this day, I wonder about the actual odds of that happening. It feels like the chances are way more than 1 in a million. Story 17. I walked into a bookstore, picked up a book, and it opened to a page with my full name written inside it in someone else's handwriting. Story 18. I watched the doctor perform brain death tests on my 41-year-old sister after she suffered a spontaneous brain bleed on Thanksgiving morning. She had beautiful blue eyes, and seeing them pry her eyelids open and move her head to check for response, while her gaze remained fixed forward, was haunting. Story 19. Seeing Saturn with my own eyes through my telescope brought tears to my eyes. It was so beautiful. I still can hardly believe it. Story 20. I was on the Random Acts of Kindness subreddit. A young lady was looking for love and support because it had been a tough year, and her birthday was coming up on September 11th. Once we established I wasn't a serial killer, I direct messaged her asking where I could send a nice card and gift. She sent me the address. I stopped and stared into space for 2 minutes because I could literally see the building from where I was sitting. It was 2 buildings away from mine. Story 21. I went to Spain 1 year and then returned 2 years later, staying in the same hotel and seeing the same man both times. I spoke to him and he had traveled there at the same times that I did. It's incredible. Story 22. One time, I saw a woman on the street drop her phone, and 5 different people around her all reached down at the exact same time, like a perfectly choreographed scene. It didn't feel real. Story 23. I experienced a difficult moment a few years ago when I was completely broke. I wanted to buy flowers and chocolates for my wife for her birthday, which would cost about $80. However, I only had $6 in my account. I sat outside on a bench feeling very sad in the windy weather. As if in a movie, I was sitting in this deserted town when something struck me in the face and stuck to me. It was a $100 bill. Story 24. I was on a trip halfway around the world, walking around the city by myself. I popped into a tiny museum. There was only one other person there, another woman about my age. We started chatting. I'm from the United States, she was from Australia, and we were in Singapore. She mentioned she had attended university in the United States. I asked where. It turns out she went to the same small college I did, and at the same time. It got even crazier when I learned she had been friends with my college roommate and had visited my apartment. It is a small world. Story 25. About 10 years ago, my husband and I made friends with another couple while on holiday. They were also from the United Kingdom, but lived far to the south while my husband and I were up north, about 5 to 6 hours apart. We met on a day trip, started chatting, and spent most of the day together. We said goodbye at the end of the day, and that was that. A few weeks after we returned home, I started a new job at a car dealership. Who were the first people to walk through the door on my first day? The couple from holiday. It turned out their son attended a university nearby, and they had come to visit him. While waiting for him to have a break in lectures, they decided on a whim to look at some cars. So many different decisions had to align to make that meeting at the car dealership happen. It makes me feel strange if I think about it for too long. Story 26. I always check copies of Harry Potter to see if they are rare. It's just a habit. Obviously, the odds of finding a rare one are low. Until I actually did. I was filled with goosebumps. It sold for just over $6,000. Story 27. Recently, I walked out of work, looked to my left, and Norman Reedus was rolling a joint. I was the only one who seemed to notice. Story 28. I attended a Fish concert in Alabama and had seats at the back of the amphitheater. For some reason, the usher checked my ticket and directed me to the pit area. Since I didn't have assigned seats, I wandered around. Eventually, I crawled under a rail and sat dead center in the seats immediately behind the pit. The guys to my left informed me that those seats were taken. I replied that I would get up and move when their friends arrived. A guy sitting to my right tapped my shoulder and mentioned that we had traded CDs of live Fish shows on an internet message board. He recognized me from a photo. The original ticket holder for my seat never showed up. So I enjoyed the entire show from the front row seats behind the pit next to someone who recognized me from our CD exchanges. There was also a stunning shooting star that night. Story 29. In 2010 or 2011, my wife and I were driving back from a professional tennis tournament in Miami to our home in Lakeland. which is between Tampa and Orlando. The tournament ended late, so we decided to start our 4-hour trip at about midnight. We took the rural Route 27, which passes through many small towns known for speed traps. The speed limit back then dropped from 55 to 35 as you entered each town. My radar detector would go off right at the speed limit sign for about 75% of the towns we passed through. It was ridiculous. In one town, I don't remember which, there was only one traffic light that turned yellow as I approached it. I would have had to speed to beat the red light, but I was suspicious, and sure enough, I got caught by radar. It was strange because there was no other traffic to trigger the light. I looked around and found the police officer parked nearby. So, I sat at the red light, waiting for it to turn yellow for the other direction, and it never did. It went from green to red, and then green for my way. The police officer was controlling the light. I thought the initial yellow light was just a bit too perfect in timing, and then it skipping yellow in the other direction confirmed it. I'm pretty sure most people I've told this story to don't quite believe me. Story 30. I was hiking alone in the mountains when a sudden fog rolled in, creating complete whiteout conditions. As I tried to figure out my bearings, I heard the sound of jingling bells. Out of the mist appeared an old man with a staff, leading about 20 goats. He nodded at me without saying a word, walked past, and then disappeared into the fog with his goats. The entire encounter lasted perhaps 30 seconds. Story 31. I boarded a plane for Greece and had the entire front row of the center aisle bulkhead to myself. The flight attendant served a surprisingly delicious Greek meal with a glass of wine. I experienced a moment of pure happiness I'll never forget. The trip was better than the flight by far, but all the pleasant surprises during the flight were unexpected. Story 32. I opened my neighbor's locker in high school. The moment I touched that dial lock, I knew the combination and entered it correctly the first time. I freaked out and slammed the door shut when I saw feminine items inside. I went back to my locker and input my code without any issues. I tried to remember her code just to see if I could, but it was a complete blank. It was strange. Story 33. Seeing the full eclipse was truly stunning. At first, I thought someone was projecting an image into the sky, but then I realized it was real, making it one of the most amazing experiences ever. Story 34. When a police officer knocked on my door and said my mom was dead, I learned she had been hit by a car while walking home from work. At first, I thought it was a joke, and then I fell to the ground for a moment, unable to breathe. The investigator provided me with information while I was shaking. He even offered me his jacket, which was very kind of him. I didn't know how to react or what to do. Since I was the first to know, I had to call everyone, even though I could hardly form a sentence. It happened at 3 a.m., so nobody answered the phone until the next morning. I don't think I slept for about 3 days, even with the help of my friend. Story 35. I had a phone call with my mother's attending doctor in the emergency room. They informed me that she had about a 5% chance of survival based on the damage COVID caused to her lungs. She granted me power of attorney, giving me the final say on whether or not to withdraw life support. She beat those odds and is still healthy to this day. Story 36. I had a childhood friend with the same first name as me, which was an uncommon name at that time. We moved when I was young and I forgot about her. I honestly thought I had made her up. About 10 to 12 years later, after moving back to the same state but in a different county, I went to work at a restaurant with another server who had my name. We became friends and reminisced about our childhood. She told me a story of a young girl with her name who lived down the street from her. It turns out we found each other again after 10 years of forgetting about each other. We were so excited that the manager came to tell us to be quiet. Story 37. When I reported that I was gang raped to my command, they threatened to court-martial me for underage drinking and making a false report. I was 18, serving overseas, and had been in bed asleep when they broke into my barracks room. I didn't drink. You see it on the news and hear whispers, but when the reality sets in that no one is going to help you despite doing everything right, it feels like an alternate reality. Story 38. I went into my local pub around the corner for a pint before taking a taxi into the city. I went to a random bar and was served by the same bartender who had served me in the pub. It turned out he had served me as his last customer in the pub before starting his shift at the other bar. I thought he had a twin or something. We both found it really funny. Story 39. Watching the second plane slam into the second tower from the street. Everything reverberated. No one was in charge. Time slowed down and nothing made sense. Story 40. Waking up from major abdominal surgery with 4 4-inch wide by 4-inch deep open holes in my abdomen. I almost lost my mind every time I caught a glimpse of them. Story 41. I am 30 years old and on a European vacation with my grandmother. Every few minutes, I cannot believe how fortunate I am to be 30 with a grandmother healthy enough to travel. Story 42. I boarded a bus in the wrong city, heading in the wrong direction, and still arrived exactly where I needed to be. Story 43. I used to sort letters at post offices. During my time, I handled millions of letters. One time, while sorting, I received a letter addressed to me, with my name and address on it. Story 44. On a beautiful autumn Tuesday morning, I was driving my boyfriend to work. We loved to drive with the radio off and talk. We started to see people pulled over on the side of the expressway looking unwell. Not just one car, but multiple cars were pulling over. I felt a chill at the back of my neck and pulled over. Turning on the radio, I heard the DJ sobbing on air. That was when I learned about the planes hitting the towers. That was when I realized my boyfriend would probably be called to duty. That was when I realized my best friend worked in the second tower. That day changed my life, and I can remember how surreal it all felt for the next few weeks. It was like walking around in a haze of grief, disbelief, pain, and compassion for everyone. Story 45. While doing a puzzle and picking up a piece to find where it belongs, I dropped the piece and lost track of it. I couldn't find it anywhere until I realized it had fallen into the exact right place. There is no chance of that ever happening again in my life. Story 46. 11 years ago, a man, just a few steps away from me, jumped in front of an incoming train. I will never forget that scene. Poor soul. Story 47. I was camping alone in the Hoh rainforest in Washington state. I was about 6 miles from any civilization, camped right next to a river. I became pleasantly intoxicated while the sun set and the river quickened its pace. I then started hearing a sound that resembled a basketball being dropped from a great height and bouncing until it stopped. However, it was much louder than a basketball and echoed throughout the forest. The noise continued throughout the night until I fell asleep. In the morning, I did not hear anything. It turned out to be a giant boulder being pushed by the river, and the bouncing noise was it settling back down. Story 48. My 5-year-old daughter was in a parade with her dance school. When it was time to take a group photo, she stood next to my biological half-sister, who is also 5 years old. I knew it was a possibility, but seeing it was truly bizarre. Story 49. Laughing at funny name ideas, I think the name was Asus Blastus, while doing deliveries for work. I stopped at a customer's house and handed over their food, only for the mother to address her daughter as Blastus, or something that sounded oddly similar. I truly thought I was having a stroke. I'm genuinely still not sure I heard her correctly. Story 50. Driving in a whiteout blizzard that came out of nowhere, I saw a vehicle flipping headfirst multiple times in the opposite lane on a stretch of road that had one lane each way. There was nowhere safe to pull over and check on them either. I had to drive another 3 miles to work to call the sheriff and let them know. It turns out the driver, her husband, and their 2 toddler passengers were all fine, with just bumps and bruises. They came and ate at my restaurant the next day, and during our conversation, they mentioned having an accident. I told them I was the one who called it in. It was surreal. Story 51. I am a defense attorney. Last year, I second-chaired a week-long murder trial. I handled the expert witnesses, directing our expert and cross-examining the government's experts. My coworker took the lead on the opening statement, closing argument, and lay witnesses. We believed we had a strong case, and my coworker did an excellent job, especially in the closing argument. Without going into too much detail, it was a bar fight that went wrong. A man burst into a crowd intoxicated, pushing people and using racial slurs. One thing led to another, and he got into a fight with a large group of people outside the bar, with estimates of 10 to 30 people involved. My client, a tall, heavy-set black woman, was accused of kicking the victim in the head while he was down, which the prosecution claimed was the cause of death. Only 1 or 2 people claimed to have seen my client do that, and they were sisters from a family known for their criminal activities. One of them, a young white girl, was caught on tape bragging about kicking the man 3 times in the head and mimicking the action. We put her on the stand, and she admitted that she had lied to the police. We had a witness staying in an apartment above the street where the incident occurred. She heard the commotion, looked out the window, and saw what she described as a short white man kicking the victim after the fight had ended. She assumed it had to be a man because she believed no woman could be that violent. The jury deliberated for hours. Finally, around 9 p.m., the verdict was read. Guilty on all counts. My client kept repeating, "No, no, 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 no." Her mother sobbed in the gallery behind me. My co-counsel was devastated. He looked at me in a way I had never seen before or since. He was completely drained, but we were not finished yet. With a guilty verdict, we had to proceed to the sentencing phase, during which the jury would decide how many years my client would receive. I had never participated in that phase of a trial before, let alone handled it myself. He asked me to take over and manage the witnesses and the closing argument. Just one look at him indicated that, despite my lack of experience, I was in a better position to handle it than he was. But then, the clerk and the judge discovered an error in the verdict. The jury had to return to deliberate again. Perhaps they meant to find her not guilty or guilty of a lesser charge. For another 30 to 40 minutes, they returned to the jury room. Once again, they came back and confirmed the verdict. Guilty on all counts as charged. My client and her family endured the horror of hearing it twice in an hour. Somehow, even though every fiber of my being was screaming that it was a nightmare and that I needed to wake up, I managed to get myself together enough to get through the sentencing phase. I delivered a closing argument off the top of my head without any preparation. At that point, it was past 10:30 p.m. We were all utterly exhausted. I spoke from my heart and drew upon the heartfelt stories her family had shared about her. The jury returned with the minimum sentence for the murder charge, which was the only real victory we achieved in this entire ordeal. However, I will never forget that night. I have never had to physically resist the urge to run away like that before. It felt like that moment in a bad dream when I realize I'm about to die. But instead of waking up with my heart pounding, I just kept going, and it kept getting worse. I know that girl was wronged, and I will carry that with me always. Story 52. I received a text from my dad 3 hours after he passed away. It was just a photo of our dog. Turned out he had scheduled it earlier, but for a moment I couldn't breathe. Story 53. I often travel through the airport for work. One weekend, I decided to visit the Interfaith Chapel to explore because I had a delay and had never seen it before. When I walked in, there was a man with a trumpet sitting in the pew against the back wall. The timing could not have been more perfect. As soon as I entered, he began playing the chicken dance song. I turned my head before I realized what was happening and made direct eye contact. I gave him a confused look and then slowly left. I left feeling very confused. As it was 6 a.m., I spent most of the day thinking about that brief interaction. I don't know what religion he was a part of, but I want to join it. Story 54. The day my 13-year-old brother passed away, I found out at school after my school counselor called home to check on him. Seeing her face suddenly drop and her immediately telling me, "We're getting you home," felt unbelievably surreal. Sitting on the couch and being told he had passed away felt like I was on another planet. Bodily, I was there, but mentally I was not. It was the most surreal feeling I have ever experienced. I felt as though I was watching it all happen from across the room, and all I remember thinking was, "This isn't real. Not my baby. Not my baby." Then darkness. Story 55. I was once in the Yukon many years ago. I was there for the breakup of the Yukon River. The size of the giant chunks of ice that were dislodged and started flowing was incredible. I was walking on the frozen river when, 5 minutes later, house-sized pieces of ice began crashing into each other, destroying anything in their path. Story 56. I saw a log truck lose its load when it took an off-ramp too fast, just as I was coming up the main road. It was surreal, like it was happening in slow motion. The log bunk started to lean halfway down the ramp before tilting completely sideways. Luckily, there was a large enough gap of sloped grass that people had plenty of warning to stop or speed up. As far as I recall, there were no damages other than the truck. Story 57. My sister and I are 8 years apart. She is older. When I was in 11th grade, we had to read The Great Gatsby. She loves the book and movie and even has a tattoo related to it. When you receive a book from school, you must write your name in it so that if you misplace it, someone will know to whom it belongs. When I received my copy at the start of the unit, I flipped it open and saw my sister's copy with her name handwritten inside. 8 years later. It was so cool. Story 58. I was Christmas shopping with my then fiancée, now wife, on November 20th, 2005. We went to Suncoast trying to think of gift ideas. As we were about to round the corner, my wife stopped us, saying she just thought of getting Friends season DVDs for a friend. We made our way back into Suncoast, and seconds later, a mass shooter opened fire. We were walking directly to where the shooter began shooting, so we would have been right in front of him if we had not turned back. I will never forget the echoes of the gunshots and the people screaming. I am pretty sure that as I ran out to help elderly women frozen in place, I saw some people get shot. I had run into a coworker minutes before the attack. He saw much more than I did and was quite affected by it. He was a big truck driver who always acted tough. But when I saw him after he returned to work, he started crying when I asked if he was okay. We were locked in Suncoast for a bit, listening to the gunfire and screams, while a Suncoast promotional film was playing along with Christmas music in the background. It was quite eerie. Initially, others and I thought it might be a gang-related incident since mass shootings weren't as common back then. But as the shots continued and the screams intensified, we realized we were trapped. We yelled at the Suncoast employees to let us out the back. I believe we left just as hostages were being taken at the nearby music store. As we were filing out the back, police cars surrounded us, with more arriving. People were outside, some crying, some screaming. It was intense, and we missed it by seconds thanks to those Friends DVDs. Story 59. Every time I go to the railway station or airport, I see a man who looks like my father. I have seen him multiple times over the past decade. Story 60. I was riding a city bike down 9th Avenue in Manhattan when the front wheel hit something and I was thrown over the handlebars. In that split second, a part of my mind told me to lean backward, and I ended up doing a superhero landing. I am not coordinated enough to do something like that if I tried, but to my utter shock, I pulled it off without a scratch. To top it off, when I picked up the bike, I saw someone standing there looking at me in shock, and I had the presence of mind to bow toward them before riding off. Autopilot and adrenaline are amazing things. Story 61. Old Wellington pub in Manchester, around 2015. I watched a woman's coffee cup fly off the table and smash on the floor without her being anywhere near it. She was as stunned as I was. She saw that I had witnessed it and asked if she thought she had touched it. I told her definitely not. She and her friend jumped up instantly and left. It was the strangest thing I've ever experienced. Story 62. When my country experienced a massive earthquake that took lives, I had a newborn and a 3-year-old at the time and was at my parents' house alone when the quake hit. My dad had many old carpentry tools, bricks, and other relics on the shelves in the lounge above me. They all fell during the violent shaking. I was thrown off my chair onto the floor. My daughter was in her bouncer beneath me, and I crawled over to pull my son from the other side of the floor where he was playing with his cars until the shaking stopped. As soon as the earth settled, I picked up my son, carried the bouncer, and ran into the street. There were alarms going off, people running, cars speeding, and mayhem everywhere. Oddly, a man walked past me nonchalantly reading a book as if nothing had happened. My neighbor took me into her undamaged house until my mom came running past, and we waited there for several hours until my dad got home from work. as traffic was horrific for obvious reasons, to assess the house for structural damage. The house was habitable but a write-off through insurance. What was most surreal was that my dad took a photo of the lounge that late afternoon after the quake. Where I was sitting, most of the tools had fallen onto the chair, and if the force of the quake hadn't thrown me off, I would have been killed. My daughter was lying in her bouncer, and she had a clear circle where no tools had landed on the floor, and my son was also in another blank spot free from any falling tools and debris. Every other part of the floor had something on it. We were very fortunate. Additionally, my dad never put anything dangerous on the shelves again. Story 63. Actually, I have two moments involving the same person. First, I shared on Twitter how much I loved her first book and mentioned that I borrowed it multiple times from the library. She then sent me a direct message asking for my address because she wanted to gift me the book. She indeed did, including a handwritten note. Second, I am currently reading her new book and searched for something she mentioned. I couldn't find any information, so I decided to reach out to her on Blue Sky yesterday. She had written about a certain rapper being in jail due to serious crimes. Turns out she confused two rappers. She expressed her gratitude, as the printing of the second edition will begin tomorrow. Story 64. This is a bit long but hopefully worth it. Where I live, there is a castle just down the road. The lord of the area still lives there. He is a bit younger than me, and our sons attended the local state primary school together and became friends. I became friends with his father. He is a normal guy who knows who his ancestors were for 800 years. He gets invited to a lot of events and was invited to take part in a local regatta, a rowing race. He needed 2 more rowers for a paired relay. He asked me if I would participate and I agreed, explaining that I sail but don't really row. That was fine. It was just for fun. Another rower was found. We were to row the first leg together. The other rower and I met only on the evening of the race, and it wasn't until we were on the water that I realized he was taking this seriously. He soon had to temper his expectations when he saw how bad I was. He made no fuss about the change in approach but coached me along. We came in last for the changeover. It turned out that this guy was a gold medalist in the British Rowing Championships. The second leg didn't go any better. Our other pair were also very amateur, and we were competing against seasoned rowers. We finished last by a long way. We stayed for the presentation of cups. The Lord Mayor of the town was presenting these awards. By chance, his wife had previously been my teaching assistant, and there was a cup for the first boat that entered from a local town, not the town where the regatta was held. There was only one boat from there, us. So there I was, with a lord of the realm, a British gold medalist, and a local historian, being presented with a cup despite coming in dead last by the wife of the Lord Mayor, who had previously been my teaching assistant. For rowing my first time in about 20 years. Not my usual day. Story 65. I was walking down the sidewalk on Sunset Boulevard and bumped into someone who looked just like me. We were both wearing the exact same t-shirt in the same color. We pointed at each other, said "nice shirt," laughed and kept walking. Story 66. Assisting in an organ donation and witnessing the moment when a young woman's heart was lifted out of her chest. Walked across the operating room, carefully packed into a transport chamber, and then carried out of the room at a sprint was profound. Until that point in the harvest, it hadn't sunk in for me that the patient was deceased because she was a donation after brain death, so she felt warm to the touch and was under anesthesia monitoring. Once the heart was removed, we packed her chest cavity with ice and continued harvesting the kidneys, spleen, and vessels. The anesthesia team removed her breathing tube and left the operating room. I remember feeling a chill during that strange slow-motion moment as her heart was lifted out, as if I was witnessing something sacred. The team was notified later that week that her organs had saved 6 lives. And while I don't know how those patients are doing now, I hope that heart is still beating somewhere. Story 67. I slept next to a deceased man in the hospital for a whole night. I sensed something was wrong when I went to the bathroom and noticed the room had an unpleasant odor. However, a part of me couldn't fully comprehend it until the morning check at 8 a.m. when one of the nurses approached him and visibly reacted. Then they informed me that they needed to clean the room, so I had to be moved. They clearly made a mistake but didn't want to admit it. I will never forget the image of him across from me. Story 68. An elderly neighbor came over and asked, "Do you want to see something?" I replied yes, and she told me to grab my keys. It was already late at night, but I shrugged and got my keys, and she met me at my car. She gave me directions to a farm with a fenced area containing about 80 to 100 cows. We stood outside the fence, and she kept checking her watch. At that point, I was sure I was going to get murdered. But what happened next? I still can't explain it. One by one, all the cows knelt down. They stayed that way for a solid minute or two, and then they got up and started roaming around normally again. She got back in the car, and after I picked up my jaw, I got in and we drove home silently. When we pulled in, I asked her what I had just seen. She made the gesture of zipping her lips and throwing away the key. I went back to the farm several times alone and never saw anything out of the ordinary. I even spoke to an employee for the property and probably looked like a complete psychopath asking the questions I was. She refused to acknowledge anything. This was over 25 years ago, and I still think about it. Story 69. I ran into my political science professor in the bathroom in Paris. I attended college in New York, and we were both there on separate vacations. Story 70. I went horseback riding in Iceland once with about 8 other people. It was the first and only time I rode a horse. It was a lovely experience. At the end, when all the horses were back in their fenced yard and unsaddled, they all simultaneously began rolling around on the ground like dogs wanting belly rubs. It was the only time in my life that I actually wondered if I was dreaming because it was so bizarre. Story 71. When I was about 16, my girlfriend and I were walking through a shopping center and passed a man sitting at a table collecting for a charity. He had long white hair and was probably in his 60s. He stopped me and told me that I looked like I played guitar, I had long hair, and did, in fact, play guitar just like every teenage metalhead in the 2000s, and that he was looking to start a band. He said that I had the look he was searching for, and he took out a binder from his bag full of old photographs of himself in an Ozzy Osbourne tribute band that he sang in years ago. I gave him my number. I shouldn't have, but I was awkward and bemused, and went on my way. Later that night, I was telling my girlfriend's father, who had been singing in a tribute band himself for years, about the encounter. He said, "That sounds like Father Francis. He used to sing in tribute bands back in the day. His shtick was that he was a priest. He would dress up in the whole get-up and sing Ozzy songs. I thought that was a pretty funny coincidence." Fast forward to a couple of years ago, I was living out in the country and was getting out of the car to go into the local supermarket when a car pulled up behind me and a man called out, "Hey, you look like Nikki Sixx from Motley Crue." I absolutely do not, by the way. "Do you play guitar?" It was Father Francis again. He didn't remember me but stopped me for the same conversation twice, 15 years apart, in 2 completely different parts of the country. It turns out he was living in the same town that I had moved to and was still looking for band members. I met with him a few times for coffee and had some long, interesting phone conversations with him. He led a very interesting life, and I gave him lyrics to some songs he was trying to figure out by ear, telling him to call me whenever he got the rest of the band together. Suddenly, I stopped hearing from him and found out that he had passed away not long after that. So, rest in peace, Father Francis. Thank you for the best small world story I will ever have. Story 72. I checked out a book from the library in the greater Seattle area, and someone had left a credit card receipt in it as a bookmark. I knew the person slightly, but we were not friends who read the same books or anything like that. It was very random. Story 73. I was still living with my parents and girlfriend. We used to sleep in the back room with a window looking out to the backyard. I had a dog that was terminally ill. One of the symptoms was that she would get up and drink constantly, often until she threw up. Every night, we would hear her walk across the porch and drink. For obvious reasons, we had to put my dog down. The night after my dog was put down, my girlfriend and I still heard dog footsteps on the porch and drinking sounds. It was faint, and we would hear it at different times, subtle enough for us both to think it was just a phantom sound. Fast forward a few days to the World Cup. I live in Australia, so the games were on extremely early, around 4 a.m. My work colleagues wanted to watch the Australian game together, so we decided to meet up at work early to watch it. This meant I was leaving for work early. It was unusually foggy that morning, so foggy that I couldn't see the garage on the other side of the backyard. As I got into the garage, I felt something bump my leg. Took me by surprise, but was only soft. Then I felt another push. This time I almost fell over. I looked down and my dog was staring back up at me. Emaciated, covered in dirt, but wagging its tail and happy to see me. My brain completely broke. I couldn't understand what I was seeing. Had my dog dug itself out of a grave to say goodbye? No, of course not. But this was really happening. She was jumping on me. While I was trying to process all this, I was also involuntarily making a weird wailing noise, loud enough that my girlfriend and mother came outside to see what was going on. This confirmed that it was really happening, as they burst into tears and completely freaked out. After everything settled down, it turned out that unbeknownst to me, my dog had a doppelganger about 15 houses down from me. Exact same markings, just a lot thinner. Apparently, she had dug her way out of the property and escaped the night my dog was put down. She was living under our house, and the noises we heard were literally her moving around. That morning, she had come out into the fog to greet me. I've been mugged, traveled, and had countless experiences since then, but that was the only time I can truly say my mind snapped. I literally just made a weird whine because I couldn't comprehend how this supernatural event was happening before my eyes. I could not process it at all. Story 74. Somebody committed suicide in front of me by jumping off a multi-story car park. They landed right in front of me. Couldn't believe what I saw. I shouted over to a man working in the car park to ask him, but he didn't see. I had to stand over the body to take it in. Story 75. When I arrived at a performance, my fiancé was proposing to me. It felt incredible that he timed everything perfectly, so I didn't suspect anything before I was meant to understand. There were many moving parts, and he pulled it off. Story 76. This was about 2 decades ago, but it was so uncanny that I can remember it like yesterday. My friend Josh and I were skipping school. We had both feigned illnesses for the day, and when our parents had left for work, we met up. We didn't really have a plan, but we wanted a day full of adventures. That's when we heard the news that a terrorist group called Al-Qaeda had flown a passenger airplane into the World Trade Center. Story 77. My son Lucas was traveling on a random bus in the rainforest in Central America when a girl said, "Hi, Adam." He replied, "Sorry, my name is Lucas, but I have a brother named Adam." It turns out she worked with his brother in London. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.